I am so excited today to share with you guys a no-line coloring technique video. This is a video that I'm doing in collaboration with Justine Hovey. She is super talented, so please go check her out, and she'll be posting a no-line coloring video today as well. I also wanted to enter this card into Scrap and Stamper's Facebook challenge, which is to make a shaker card. This is a card that I made for my niece at the request of my mom, who's going up to visit just in time for my niece's graduation. The first part will be the no-line coloring of this gorgeous girl image called the owl, and then the second part will be the assembly. No-line coloring is kind of a misnomer because you are stamping with an ink. There are lines. It's just that you're doing it with a fainter ink. I'm using Memento Desert Sand, which I think is a great color, especially when you're coloring images that have skin tones, because they really disappear. I'm coloring this image in kind of an Asian color scheme, so there's a yellow undertone to these skin colors. I'm using E50, 51, and 53, and R30 for the blush. And the first part I did was just putting down a base coat of E50, and then I'm trying to pick out the areas that are going to be shaded. The parts that are shaded right at the place where her hair meets her face, under her hair like by her shoulders, and kind of on her right arm where the owl is standing under that owl, on the under parts of the arms, because I'm assuming that the light source is coming from kind of above and in front of her. And then I go back in with the darkest of my skin tones, which is E53. And whenever I do this, I always get a little scared because that E53 looks so dark. But once you blend it out back with E51 and E50, it really looks very natural. So don't worry as you're coloring. You'll also see here that there seems to be like a green cast, and that's just because my paper is being fully saturated, and I think you're seeing the green cutting mat underneath the paper. If you want to protect your cutting mat more, I would recommend also coloring on a clipboard or putting papers underneath this paper that you're coloring, but I don't really mind. There's the blush, it's R30, and to blend in the blush with the rest of her skin, I flick kind of from the outside toward the blush colored areas and then back out with E50, the lightest skin tone color. There I'm taking a R32 just because I wanted some little pink highlights where her hearts are in her hair and on her little boots. Now I decided to color in the feathers that she's holding. Now I know she's titled the owl, so I probably should have colored her in owl colors, but I decided I wanted to do this in kind of blues and greens, almost more like peacock colors. Peacocks are one of my favorite birds, so I'm coming in to put the base coat in with B00, and then toward the middle of the feather where the feathers would be the darkest, I go in with B01 and then B04. And then I decided the blues were kind of a little too boring. I wanted to bring in those kind of greenish colors. So then I brought in BG13 and BG18. And you'll see the colors of the marker caps, and those are not really true to the color. So I always rely on my Copic color chart that I have colored in myself. That's just a little tip, because if you rely on the cap colors, you're not going to get an accurate representation of what the colors are going to look like when you put them down. Here I'm doing the dress that she's wearing in the same colors, but I'm dividing it up. So the lower part of her dress is the blues, and then the little top part of her dress and her boots I'm doing in the blue-green colors. Again, the base coats are B00, B01, And even though the dress looks flat, I wanted it to look more like real fabric would look. So I'm creating kind of dips and shadows where I think the fabric would kind of recess back from her body. So on the edges of, on either side of her legs, between her legs, under her hair, that's where I'm putting in the shadows. And I think that gives kind of a more realistic look of fabric versus just coloring it in all one color and then just shading in the edges. I also try to create little pleats from the top part of her dress to the bottom part of her dress where they meet. And there I'm going back in with the BG13, no, I'm sorry, the B01 to blend out the B04, which I think was a little bit dark. I like the darker color because I think when you do that full range of light to dark, it makes the images come more alive and pop a little bit more. Here I'm putting it down the same base color, that B00, for the top of her dress. So the early parts of this coloring is the same as the lower part of the dress, but I then go over the top with the BG colors to bring in that blue-green color. And you'll notice I try to color with going from light to dark on my image. So I started with the skin tone colors, which are very light, then the pale pinks for her little hearts, and then I went on to the blues. If you accidentally go from a darker part of the image to a lighter part, it's a little more difficult to hide your flaws. I knew I wanted to make this little girl have black hair because my niece has black hair, so I knew that even though I was anxious to get to the hair coloring part because I think that's fun, I did that last. Here you see, you can see a little bit better here rather than at the top of her dress. Later, the green coloring kind of showing up on the edges of her boots. And I go through and blend it all out again, the edges with that BG13, that mid-tone. And you'll also notice that I'm coloring way outside the lines, but I'm not worried about that at all because I'm going to be fussy cutting this image out. And coloring outside the lines actually, I think, helps me blend the colors better. And you can see me here trying to put in those little tiny areas of shading to create the look of the pleats and kind of where her collar meets the top of her dress. Just little areas where I think there should be shadows. So I wanted to give this little girl black hair, and you're seeing here I'm putting in blue highlights. You're thinking, oh my gosh, Christina's crazy, she's putting in blue and black hair, but I really like the way the blue makes black hair look really super healthy and shiny. So I'm using B00, but you can use more intense colors. I've used all the way up to B21 for blue highlights for black hair. And I'm using the cold gray black colors here. I'm using C5, C7, and C9. And I go in from light to dark and then back down again. And again, I'm just trying to put in the highlights and put in flicking motions where I think that light would hit the tops of her hair. So where there are waves that, pop out, that's the part that I would leave either white or with blue and little flicks of the gray colors. Here I'm bringing in the next darker color, the C7, and I'm going over a lot of the areas where the C5 was, but really more intensely where I think the darker shadows would be. I'm also coloring in the areas that I had left white at the tips of her hair and behind her head, like where her neck is. That's all going to be first colored in C7 and then again in C9. Now I'll confess something to you guys here. I almost didn't get this stamp, even though I love the fact that she's holding these feathers, like she can fly, and she has this cute little owl on her shoulder. Her hair looks so weird to me. They have these big bumps at the top of her head, and I thought, oh my gosh, why did they draw her in like that? It looks so odd to me. But I realized that's a really easy fix. I can just trim away that part of her hair. See there, right there, that bump is way too big. And then the bump on her side where her hair is parted, that one is ginormous. So later on, I color the whole thing in, so you'll see that coloring. But later on when I'm fussy cutting, I just cut away the parts that I think are kind of unnaturally large. Here where I'm trying to get around her little hair barrette but show the shadow that I think should exist behind it, I'm using teeny tiny little flicks there. Not my strong suit because I'm kind of a brute when it comes to coloring, but I think I just made it around that little heart. Now in my video and with this lighting, you're not really seeing the difference as I lay down this last C9. But in person, you can really see the difference where you put in the darkest colors here. And those would be occurring in the dips in her hair, in the back part of her hair between, you know, where the face and her shoulders are, and of course at the part. And the real key to hair coloring is just doing light flicking motions and making sure that you don't color into, you know, the face or shoulder or something like that. For her little stripy stockings, I knew I wanted to do gray stripes, but I wanted to do them lighter than how they're normally colored in for the Gorjuss Girls stamps themselves. I did the darker stripes in C5 and C3 and the lighter stripes in C3 and C1. And I like how that soft stripy look comes across. It kind of connects the lightest part of her little dress with her darker hair. For this little owl, I colored in the lighter portions of the owl using E53 and 55 and the darker parts of the owl in E57, layering that a little bit more where I thought there would be shadows. You'll also see me coloring a little bit with a dotting technique on the lighter portions, especially on this owl. And I do that because I wanted to give kind of the impression of feathers without obviously drawing in little feathers into the owl. I also use E59 just to create some dot eyes because with this lighter stamping with Memento Desert Sand, the ink of the stamp really just totally disappears once you color in with these different shades of brown. For the beak and the claws of the little owl, I'm using Y38, which is honey. And I think that that was just the right shade of kind of yellow-orange. Here I'm putting back in the eyes with that E59. To recreate the eyes, I'm using a 0.03 Copic multi-liner pen in black. And I actually like having slightly larger eyes than the original eyes on these Gorjuss girls. So you'll see me drawing them in a little bit bigger. I use a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen to put the white shines back in her eyes. And at the beginning you saw me roll it on my finger, and that's just to kind of warm up the nib of that pen. I also decided to add some white highlights to her dress because I wanted to give her kind of a more ethereal look. And I think the white highlights really do that. They add a really nice extra pop. I add white dots all along the edges of both feathers and down the center spine and down a few of the areas where I think the feather could use some magical highlights. I mean, really, she's trying to fly with two big feathers and they need to be magical, right? I think adding these white little dots on those feathers really makes a big difference in helping make the feathers pop a little bit more. I also use clear Wink of Stella over top of them just to give them a little extra shimmer and shine. Here I'm just fussy cutting around the image. It's actually much easier than you would expect. There aren't a lot of really detailed areas. And here you can see a little bit there at the top of her head that I cut away. I cut away even more later. For the space between her legs, I just go right up the front top edge of her front shoe and cut it away with scissors rather than an X-Acto. And that's it for the no-line coloring. The rest of this video is for the assembly of the card. Here I'm cutting out a window using the 9th largest circle nesting die from the Diamond Dies Nesting Circle die set. I'm using the die cut panel and a pencil to lightly mark in the area that I want to ink in with the different shades of Tim Holtz Distress Ink in blues. From light to dark, I'm using Tumbled Glass, Broken China, and Salty Ocean. And I wanted to create kind of an ombre effect, going from light to dark toward the top. You see, I made a little boo-boo there, and at the top of the card where I wanted it to be clean, I got some ink on there. So I actually needed to go back in with my Versamark ink so I could emboss over top of that little mistake. And I think it adds a nice sparkle because I end up using this shimmery, sparkly Recollections embossing powder all along the edge of the card. Here I'm just tapping off the excess and then brushing off some of the excess because I didn't want the sparkle embedded into the sky scene in the shaker part of the card. Here I'm die cutting a little frame for the shaker window. I'm using the scallop circle and the circle dies from the nesting die sets from Diamond Dies. And I'm just going to use some snail glue to adhere that to the front. I'm using some leftover packaging to create the front window. I love recycling, upcycling, and using that up really made me smile. I'm using E6000 to adhere that on because that is the perfect adhesive for non-porous surfaces like acetate and plastic. Here I'm putting on foam adhesive all along the edge of that front panel. I'm also going to put it all around that open die cut circle area to create the walls where the shaker pieces won't go beyond. Here you see me using an EK Tools powder tool, and I just put that all along the edge right by that window because I don't want my shaker pieces sticking to the edges, and I do that before I remove the backing. By the way, that's 2 layers of foam adhesive because the shaker pieces I put in were wood veneer birds that I had sprayed with some glimmer mist, and those were really thick. I edited away some of this embellishing portion, but basically I a triple loop baker's twine bow and some buttons that I thought were really nice finishing touches. I die cut the word dream from a little yellow bicycle die set, and I did it twice and offset the black and the pink polka dots that is the same paper as the frame of the shaker window. And I glue that and the little girl down using Martha Stewart pen glue and Aileen's original tacky glue. I kept the inside really simple with just this sentiment that I thought went so well with the design of this card. It says, "This is your time, so fly away and chase all your dreams." I hope you guys enjoyed this process video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to check out Justine's video. Thanks for watching.